The chamber was dark, except for the light that fell on Archon Velthari's face. He stood at the center of the Galaxy Council's inner circle, his crystalline body glowing faintly blue. And he spoke in a voice that had commanded the galaxy for 3,000 years. Around him sat the representatives of 13 species, each one older than human civilization, each one powerful enough to burn a star. They listened to him the way they always did, with trust and with fear. "Humans are changing," Velthari said. He waved his long fingers, and a holographic display filled the air. Charts, brain scans, growth projections. Their cognitive evolution is accelerating. Their children are developing neural pathways we have never seen in any species. In 2 generations, perhaps 3, they will surpass us. All of us. The room was silent. "They joined this council 200 years ago," he continued. "They smiled. They shared their medicine and their music. But the change is beyond our control now. We are no longer the architects of this future. It is already under construction by another species. A species we once thought we could control." He looked around the chamber, his gaze heavy with the weight of his conclusion. "We must prepare," he said. "We must adapt or we will be left behind, as relics of a bygone age. They followed our laws, but they are not like us. They adapt, they bond, they protect their young with a ferocity that borders on madness, and they are growing stronger." He paused and looked at each face in the circle. "I propose Directive 7 Omega. We will remove human children under the age of 15 from the colony worlds, and relocate them to council-controlled education facilities. We will tell the humans it is a cultural integration program. We will slow their development. We will keep the peace." The vote passed 11-2. 3 weeks later, Council enforcement ships descended on 5 human colony worlds at the same time. It was coordinated perfectly. The ships came during what they called a routine health inspection, which the humans had no reason to question. For 200 years, the Council had been their partner, their protector, their friend. On Colony Mirren 4, the white-armored soldiers moved through the streets in the early morning. They entered homes. They entered schools. They released a sedation gas that put the adults to sleep within seconds, and then they began carrying the children out. Some children were still in their pajamas. Some were holding toys. Some were crying so hard they could not breathe. Captain Una Park was aboard her cruiser in orbit when it happened. She had been running a systems check, something boring and routine, when her communications officer told her that all signals from the colony had gone dead. She switched to the emergency security feed and watched through a grainy video as soldiers in white walked into a school on the colony's eastern district. She saw 2 small girls being lifted from their seats. They were screaming. They were reaching for each other. They were her daughters. Una slammed her hand against the console so hard the metal dented. She shouted orders to break orbit, to descend, to do something, but the communication relay had been jammed. Her navigation was locked. The Council had thought of everything. She stood there and watched until the feed went dark. On Colony Daehan 2, a 14-year-old boy named Sunwoo Go was walking to school when the soldiers came. He saw them grab a girl from the street, a girl he knew from his class, and something inside him went cold and hard. He picked up a metal rod from a construction site and swung it at the nearest soldier. The rod bounced off the armor, and the soldier turned and shot him with a stun pulse. Sunwoo fell to the ground, his body locked, his eyes still open. They dragged him onto a transport ship. As they carried him, he memorized every face, every symbol on their armor, every sound they made. On the same colony, Sergeant Hyuk No was off duty. He was a ground forces soldier, part of a Terran special operations unit called the Black Hounds. But that morning, he was just a father making breakfast for his 8-year-old son. When the gas hit, Hyuk held his breath longer than most. His training gave him that. But it was not enough. He collapsed against the kitchen wall, and his son was taken from the table where his cereal was still sitting, the spoon still in the bowl. When Hyuk woke up, the bowl was cold, and his son was gone. Far away, on the Council's capital world, a small amphibian-like alien named Felness sat in his office and stared at the report on his screen. He was a junior diplomat, low-ranking, unimportant, but he had helped coordinate the logistics of Directive 7 Omega, and now that it was done, he could not stop his hands from shaking. He had seen the footage from the colonies. He had heard the children screaming. He opened a secure channel, one he was not supposed to know about, and sent fragments of the classified directive to the one human he trusted, Dr. Hana Lim, humanity's ambassador to the Council. Hana had been kind to him for 12 years. She had treated him like a person when others treated him like furniture. When Hana received the message, she read it 3 times. Her face did not change. Her hands did not shake. Something behind her eyes simply died. The trust she had carried for 12 years, the belief that the galaxy was good and fair and just. It broke apart inside her like glass falling from a great height, and in its place there was nothing but a terrible, frozen clarity. She contacted Director Taewoo Shin on a black channel. Taewoo was the head of Terran intelligence, a man who smiled rarely and trusted no one. When Hana told him what had happened, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know. My people flagged the ship movements 18 hours ago. I was waiting for confirmation." Taewoo sent a single encrypted message to Earth. It contained 5 words that would end 15,000 years of galactic peace. They took our children. On Earth, in a quiet office overlooking a city that had not known war in centuries, Admiral Do-hun Kang read the message on his screen. He did not shout. He did not curse. He set down his tea very gently, as if the cup might break. He stood up, walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room, and opened it with a key he wore around his neck. Inside was a black binder, thick and heavy. On the cover, in red letters, it read, "Broken Horizon." He picked up his communicator and called Vice Admiral Nari Bake. "Wake everyone up," he said. His voice was calm. His eyes were not. That night, across all of human space, lights turned on in military bases that had been dark for 100 years. Ships that had been sleeping in deep docks began to hum. Soldiers who had never seen combat checked their weapons and kissed their families goodbye. No announcement was made. No declaration was given. The galaxy did not notice. But humanity had begun to move. And when humanity moved for its children, it did not stop until the job was done. Station Orith 9 hung in the blackness of space like a cold white eye. It was a council facility built far from any trade route, hidden behind a gas giant where no one would look. Inside it, 4,200 human children lived in rows of small rooms with metal walls and no windows. They were fed nutritional paste 3 times a day. They were woken at 6 and put to sleep at 9, and every afternoon they were taken to a room where machines pressed against their heads and hummed at a frequency designed to slow the development of their brains. The council called it cognitive adjustment. The children called it the headache room. Warden Korith ran the station with the kind of calm that came from not caring. He was tall and gray-skinned, with 4 arms and eyes that never blinked. And he saw the human children the way a farmer sees grain, something to be managed, measured, and stored. The reports said things like subject compliance within acceptable range and neural dampening proceeding on schedule. But Sun Woo Go was not complying. From his first day on the station, Sun Woo had watched and listened. He learned the guards' patrol routes by counting their footsteps. He figured out which cameras had blind spots by dropping things and seeing when no one came. And he began to organize the older children, quietly, carefully, in whispers during mealtimes and in gestures during exercise periods. He taught them to speak in Korean slang, words and phrases so informal and so specific to the colonies that the alien translators could not make sense of them. The guards heard sounds, but not meaning. Sunwoo used this to pass messages, to share information, to build something that looked like nothing, but was actually the beginning of resistance. Jian-Oh, 10 years old and small for her age, did not speak much. She had been quiet before the seizure, and she was quieter now. But she listened to everything, and she noticed things that others missed. She noticed that the ventilation shafts in the station made different sounds depending on where they led. She began counting the echoes, tapping on walls during rest periods, mapping the layout of the station in her head. She told Sunwoo one evening in a whisper that she knew where every exit was. He looked at her for a long moment, and then nodded. "Remember all of it," he said. "One day someone will come for us, and when they do, we need to be ready." Far from the station, in the shining halls of the Galaxy Council, Dr. Hana Lim attended meetings. She smiled. She filed paperwork. She made polite conversation with alien diplomats who asked her how she was enjoying the cultural exchange program. She told them it was wonderful. She told them humanity was grateful. She did all of this because Director Taewoo Shin had told her to, and because she understood what silence could do. The council had expected anger. They had prepared for protests, for demands, for threats. They had war plans ready in case the humans reacted with violence. But the humans did nothing. They said nothing. They simply carried on as if nothing had happened, and this confused the council far more than any army could have. Commander Drenok, the council's military chief, did not trust the silence. He was a warrior, born from a species that had fought its way to the stars, and he understood predators. He went to Velthari privately and said, "When prey goes silent, it is not because it has accepted death." Velthari looked at him with those ancient glowing eyes and said that humans were not predators. They were cooperative beings, social creatures who valued harmony. They would adjust. They always did. Drenok left the meeting unconvinced. He doubled the patrols around council space anyway. He should have tripled them. Across human space, something enormous was happening in perfect silence. Vice Admiral Nari Bake had activated Broken Horizon, and the plan unfolded like a machine that had been waiting a very long time to turn on. Civilian cargo ships were quietly pulled into hidden docks and fitted with weapons and armor. Communication buoys, small, harmless-looking devices that humans had been placing throughout the galaxy for decades, were repositioned to create a network of surveillance that covered every council military base, every supply route, every command station. In 12 asteroid fields scattered across the outer systems, shipyards that officially did not exist began building warships at emergency speed. These yards had been constructed over the last century, maintained by skeleton crews, always ready for the day they would be needed. The workers who built the ships did not ask questions. They knew why they were building. Captain Yuna Park received new orders. Her stealth cruiser, the Gwanggaeto, was reassigned to something called the Phantom Fleet, a strike force of 12 ships equipped with cloaking technology that the Council did not know existed. Humanity had developed it decades ago and had kept it hidden, not because they planned to use it, but because they understood a truth that the galaxy had forgotten. Peace is not the absence of weapons. Peace is the absence of reasons to use them. And the Council had just given them a reason. Yuna flew the Gwanggaeto in silence through Council space, mapping defenses, testing response times, probing for weaknesses. She flew past the gas giant, where Station Orth 9 was hidden, and felt her daughters somewhere inside it, alive, waiting. She pressed her hand against the cold glass of the cockpit window, and made a promise she would not break. Taewoo's intelligence teams worked around the clock. They had been quietly studying Council military capabilities for decades. Every ship, every weapon, every protocol. They knew things about the Council's own fleet that the Council did not know about itself. Taewoo organized this information into a single operational file and delivered it to Admiral Do-hoon Kang with a simple note. "We are ready." Do-hoon read the file in one sitting. Then he sent a polite diplomatic note to the Council through official channels. It said, "We would appreciate the return of our citizens at your earliest convenience." The language was soft. The tone was respectful. The Council read it and believed it was submission. They sent back a formal response explaining that the cultural integration program was proceeding well and that the children would be returned in due time. He folded it neatly, placed it on his desk, and set a countdown timer on his console. 30 days. In the armory of a dropship parked inside a carrier that had left dock for the first time in 80 years, Sergeant Hyuk No sat on a metal bench and loaded ammunition into magazines. His hands moved with the kind of steadiness that came from years of training, but his jaw was tight and his eyes were somewhere far away. A younger soldier sat across from him, watching. "What are we getting ready for, Sergeant?" the soldier asked. Hyuk reached into his chest plate and pulled out a small photograph. It was creased and worn. In it, a small boy smiled at the camera with a gap in his front teeth. "A pickup," Hyuk said. He slid the photo back into his armor, over his heart, and kept loading. Across human space, in every ship and every base and every home, the same quiet fury burned. No one screamed. No one cried. The time for that had passed. Now there was only the waiting, and the counting of days, and the careful, patient sharpening of everything they had. 30 days, and then the galaxy would learn what happened when you touched a human's child. On the 30th day, at exactly 6 in the morning, Terran Standard Time, every human embassy in the galaxy closed its doors. There was no announcement, no warning. The ambassadors simply walked out, the lights turned off, and the doors locked behind them. At the same hour, every human merchant ship in alien space turned around and flew home. Every human scientist working in alien laboratories packed their bags. Every human engineer maintaining alien infrastructure unplugged their tools and left. The galaxy felt it immediately. 46 species depended on medicine that human factories produced. 12 species relied on navigation software that human engineers had written for their ships. Trade routes that humans had mapped went dark. Supply chains that humans had managed began to collapse. Within hours, the galactic economy started to shake like a building losing its foundation. The Council received thousands of urgent messages from member species asking what was happening. Velthari sat in his chamber and read the reports, and for the first time in his long life, he felt the cold touch of something he did not recognize. He would later understand that it was fear. Then the Terran fleet appeared. Captain Una Park's Phantom Fleet, 12 stealth cruisers that the Council's sensors could not detect, dropped out of cloaking inside the Council's core defense perimeter. This was supposed to be impossible. The Council had layered detection grids around its core systems for thousands of years, each one more advanced than the last. No species had ever penetrated them. The humans slipped through like shadows through an open door. The 12 ships surrounded Station Orith 9, where the children were held. At the same moment, the main Terran battle fleet, 700 warships in perfect formation, emerged from hyperspace at the Council's border. Their weapons were powered and their shields were up, and they came in a wall of metal and light that stretched across the darkness like a fist opening. Admiral Do-hoon Kang sat in the command chair of the flagship Baekdu. He was dressed in a plain uniform with no medals and no decorations. His face was calm in the way that deep water is calm, still on the surface and full of terrible things beneath. He opened a broadcast channel on every frequency, in every known language, and he spoke. "You took our children. We are here to bring them home. Anyone who stands between us and our children will not stand for long. This is not a negotiation." The message reached every ship, every station, and every inhabited world in the galaxy within minutes. Most of them had never heard a human speak with that tone before. It was not anger. It was not hatred. It was certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of a species that had made its decision and would not be moved from it by anything in the universe. Commander Drenok gathered the Council Defense Fleet. 2,000 ships against 700. The numbers favored him by nearly 3-1. He was a career soldier, experienced and capable, and he arranged his fleet in a standard containment formation that had won battles for millennia. He expected a hard fight, but a winning one. He was wrong. The Terran ships hit the Council fleet like a hammer hitting glass. For 200 years, humanity had shown the galaxy weapons that were adequate but unimpressive, ships that were fast but not remarkable, technology that was good but never the best. It was all a lie. Every demonstration, every shared schematic, every joint military exercise had been a performance. The real weapons, the real ships, the real technology. Humanity had kept it all hidden, buried in asteroid fields and locked behind codes that no alien intelligence had ever cracked. Terran electronic warfare systems blinded the Council's sensors in the first 30 seconds. Ships that the Council could see on their screens suddenly vanished, and ships they could not see appeared behind them and opened fire. Terran railguns punched through Council armor like needles through cloth. Terran missiles moved with an intelligence that suggested they were not just guided, but thinking, adjusting, hunting. The Council fleet broke apart in waves. Ships that tried to retreat were cut off. Ships that tried to fight were overwhelmed. The humans fought with a coordination that was almost beautiful in its precision. Every ship knew where every other ship was. Every captain trusted every other captain. And they moved together the way a single organism moves, without hesitation and without waste. Drenok stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his fleet die around him. He understood now. He understood what the humans were. They were not the cooperative, peaceful species the Council had believed them to be. They were something far more dangerous. They were a species that chose to be peaceful, that chose to hide its strength, that smiled and shared and cooperated because it wanted to, not because it had to. And when that choice was taken from them, what remained was something the galaxy had never faced. Drenok opened a channel to Velthari. "We must retreat," he said. "We cannot win this." Velthari's crystalline face flickered on the screen. "Hold the line," he commanded. "The Council does not retreat." Drenok closed his eyes. "Yes, Archon." His flagship was hit 4 minutes later. The bridge collapsed inward. Drenok was thrown into the darkness. While the fleets clashed in space, the real mission was happening at Station Orith 9. Sergeant Hyuk No and the Black Hounds launched from the Phantom Fleet in armored dropships and hit the station hard and fast. They breached the outer hull in 3 places simultaneously, blowing through airlocks and cutting through security doors with plasma torches. The station's defense forces, mostly automated drones and lightly armed guards, were designed to control children, not to stop soldiers. The Black Hounds moved through them like fire through dry grass. Hyuk led the main assault team through the station's central corridor. He moved with the kind of focus that shut out everything except the next door, the next corner, the next threat. He had trained for moments like this for 20 years, but he had never had a reason like this. Every step brought him closer to his son. Warden Korith tried to seal the children's wards and send a distress signal. The signal was jammed. The seals were cut. When the Black Hounds entered his control room, Korath raised all four of his hands in surrender. Hyuk looked at him for a long moment, and the warden saw something in the human's eyes that made him step backward until he hit the wall. "Where are the children?" Hyuk asked. Korath told him. The Black Hounds cleared the station in 11 minutes. When they reached the children's wards, they found something that surprised even them. The children were not scattered and crying. They were standing in orderly lines at the evacuation points, organized by age, the older ones holding the hands of the younger ones. Sun Woo-go stood at the front of the largest group, his jaw set, his eyes sharp. Beside him, Ji-Yoon-oh held a hand-drawn map of the station's ventilation system that she had made from memory. They had been ready. They had been waiting. A Black Hound soldier looked at the lines of children and shook his head slowly. "Even the kids are terrifying," he muttered. Hyuk found his son in Ward 7. The boy was standing with a group of younger children, shielding them with his small body, holding a broken piece of metal he had pulled from a bed frame. When he saw his father, his face crumbled, and he dropped the metal and ran. Hyuk caught him and held him against his chest, and said nothing. There was nothing to say that his arms could not say better. Aboard the Gwanggaeto, Yuna Park waited at the airlock as the evacuation shuttles docked. Children streamed out in groups, guided by soldiers who carried the smallest ones. Yuna searched every face. And then she saw them, her twin daughters, holding hands, their eyes wide and red from crying. They saw her at the same moment and screamed for her. And she was on her knees with her arms around both of them before she knew she had moved. She held them so tightly they complained, and she did not let go, not for a long time, not until she was sure they were real and warm and alive. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it was over, the Council defense fleet was scattered and broken. 300 Council ships were destroyed. 200 more were disabled. The rest had fled. The Terran fleet lost 41 ships. Every child was recovered. Every single one. Across the galaxy, every species with a communication array watched the footage. They watched the most powerful military force in galactic history crumble in less than a day. They watched humans pull their children from a prison that was supposed to be unbreakable. They watched and they understood that the galaxy had changed, that something that had been sleeping for 15,000 years had just opened its eyes, and the humans were not done. The children came home on medical ships. Doctors and nurses met them at every port, checking their bodies, scanning their brains, holding them when they cried. The cognitive dampening had caused headaches and memory fog and nightmares that would take months to fade. But there was no permanent damage. The machines had not been running long enough. The children would heal. They would remember, but they would heal. The galaxy waited for humanity to stop. The children were safe. The wrong had been corrected. Surely the humans would pull their fleet back and sit down at a table and negotiate. Surely they would return to the way things were. The galaxy did not understand humans at all. Admiral Do-hun Kang stood on the bridge of the Baekdu and recorded a message. It was broadcast on every channel, sent to every world, translated into every language. He stood in front of the camera, in his plain uniform, with his hands behind his back, and his voice steady. And he spoke to the entire galaxy at once. "For 15,000 years, you called it peace," he said. "You were proud of it. You built monuments to it. You taught your children that the Galaxy Council had created something beautiful and lasting and good. But it was not peace. It was obedience. The Council did not protect you. It managed you. It decided what you could build, and where you could travel, and how fast you could grow. It watched you and measured you, and when it thought you were becoming too strong, it acted. It acted against my people. It took our children from their beds, and if it could do this to us, it can do this to anyone." He paused. His eyes were dark and tired, and absolutely certain. Today, humanity removes itself from this system, and we invite any species brave enough to remember what freedom feels like to do the same. Within 48 hours, 41 species filed formal protests against the Galaxy Council. 6 species withdrew their membership entirely. On a dozen worlds, populations that had lived under Council rule for millennia watched Do-hun's speech and felt something they had not felt in generations, the possibility that things could be different. The Council called an emergency session. Velthari stood before the remaining members and demanded a unified military response against humanity. He spoke of duty and stability and the dangers of chaos. He spoke of the 15,000 years of order that would collapse if one species was allowed to defy the Council and survive. He was eloquent and passionate and completely wrong. Species that had quietly resented the Council's control for centuries saw what humanity had done and realized that the door they had believed was locked had been kicked open. They did not all have the courage to walk through it yet, but they could see the light on the other side. And then Liaison Felnis testified. The small, nervous, amphibian-like diplomat stood before the full council and read the classified text of Directive 7 Omega out loud. He read the parts about cognitive containment. He read the parts about neural dampening. He read the internal memos where council scientists discuss human children the way engineers discuss machines that needed to be slowed down. His voice shook the entire time, but he did not stop. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Velthari ordered his arrest. Guards took Felnis away. But it did not matter. The testimony had already been recorded. It had already been transmitted. Every world in the galaxy heard it within the hour, and every world understood what the Council had done and what it was capable of doing again. Velthari's support collapsed. 13 loyal members became 5. The Council was still standing, but it was standing on broken legs. Vice Admiral Nari Bake led what the Terran military called the Unshackling Campaign. It was not a war of conquest. Humanity did not want to rule the galaxy. It wanted to take apart the machine that had been ruling the galaxy and let everyone else decide what to do next. Terran fleets targeted Council military infrastructure, the weapon platforms that orbited member worlds, the enforcement stations that monitored trade routes, the surveillance networks that watched everything and reported to Velthari's office. They destroyed the tools of control. They did not touch the species that had been controlled by them. On every world they reached, the Terran forces broadcast the same message. Govern yourselves. If you need help, ask. If you don't, we'll leave. Most chose freedom. Some were afraid and asked for protection. Humanity gave it without conditions. But the campaign was not clean, and it was not painless. And this part of the story was important too. Unipark led her fleet through 3 engagements in 2 weeks. She fought well, her tactics sharp and her orders precise. But between battles, she sat alone in her quarters and shook with a rage that frightened her. Her daughters were safe on Earth now, staying with her mother, drawing pictures and sleeping in a real bed. But every time Yuna closed her eyes, she saw the security feed from Miran 4. She saw the soldiers carrying her girls away. She wanted more than victory. She wanted every council officer who had signed that directive to feel what she had felt. She wanted them to know what it was like to lose the thing they loved most. She carried this fury like a fire in her chest, and she knew it could burn her if she let it. But she could not put it out. Not yet. Do-hun visited the military hospitals between operations. He walked through the wards where wounded Terran soldiers lay in white beds, some missing limbs, some burned, some staring at the ceiling with the empty look of people who had seen too much. He knew every name. He stopped at every bed. He did not make speeches. He simply sat with them and listened. One young pilot, barely 20, asked him if it was worth it. Do-un looked at her for a long time and said, "Ask me when the children are grown." Hyuk-no returned to Earth with his son. The boy was physically fine, but he flinched at sudden noises and could not sleep in the dark. Hyuk put a lamp beside his bed and sat in a chair nearby every night until the boy fell asleep. He did not return to active duty. He had done what he needed to do. Now he needed to be a father. Hana Lim continued her work, but the woman who had once believed in the galaxy's goodness was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who read every document twice and trusted no one who had not earned it. She mourned the 12 years she had spent at the council, the dinners and conversations and friendships she had built with beings who had known what was coming and had said nothing. She carried Felness's testimony in her bag everywhere she went, a reminder of what trust looked like when it was betrayed. Director Tae-woo Shin watched the campaign unfold from his intelligence center on Earth. Screens covered every wall, showing fleet movements, diplomatic communications, and the shifting allegiances of 100 species. He was pleased with the progress, but not satisfied. Wars were easy to win compared to what came after. He sent a private message to Do-hun that said simply, "We've won the war. Don't lose the peace." Do-hun read it and nodded. Tae-woo was right. Breaking the council's power was necessary, but what came next would determine whether humanity had saved the galaxy or simply thrown it into chaos. He began to think about what peace would look like when it was real, when it was chosen instead of forced. On Colony Daehan 2, Sun Woo-go stood in a field near his home and looked up at the stars. The colony was rebuilding. The jamming towers were gone. The communication relays were back online. Ships came and went freely now, carrying supplies and people and news of a galaxy that was changing faster than anyone had imagined. His younger sister walked up beside him and took his hand. She was 6 and did not fully understand what had happened. But she knew her brother had been taken, and now he was back, and that was enough for her. "Will the bad aliens come back?" she asked. Sun Woo looked down at her. He was 14 years old, and he had been imprisoned and tested and treated like something less than a person. And he had survived it by being smarter and braver and more stubborn than anyone had expected. He squeezed her hand. "No," he said, "they won't." He said it like a promise. He meant it like a threat. 6 months after the Battle of Orith 9, the Galaxy Council officially dissolved. The vote was quiet. There were no speeches. The remaining members simply signed the document, stood from their seats, and walked away from a table that had held the galaxy together for 15,000 years. The chamber's lights were turned off. The doors were sealed. And just like that, it was over. Archon Velthari was stripped of his title and confined to his homeworld. He lived in a tower, overlooking a gray sea, surrounded by guards who were polite but firm. Every day, he sat at a desk and stared at star charts, tracing the paths of human colony ships with his long crystal fingers, trying to find the moment where he had miscalculated. He replayed the decision in his mind 1,000 times. The data had been clear. The projections had been sound. Humans were evolving too fast. Something had to be done. But he had missed the one variable that no chart could capture and no projection could predict. He had treated human children as a strategic resource to be controlled. He had not understood that to a human, a child was not a resource. A child was the reason for everything. The reason they built cities and crossed oceans and reached for the stars. The reason they fought when fighting was madness and endured when enduring was impossible. He had touched the one thing that turned a peaceful species into something ancient and unstoppable. And he would never understand why, because his kind did not love the way humans loved. Not with that fury, not with that fire. Humanity did not replace the council. Admiral Do-hun Kang and Dr. Hana Lim spent 3 months designing something new. They called it the Free Compact. It was a voluntary alliance, open to any species that wished to join, with no enforcement fleet, no surveillance network, and no directives. Member species governed themselves. They traded freely. They settled disputes through mediation, not force. And at the center of the Compact's charter was one absolute, unbreakable law written in every known language. No species shall seize, detain, or harm the children of another. Violation of this law would be met with the full, unified military response of every Compact member. There were no exceptions. There were no appeals. The law was written the way humans wrote promises to their children. Simply, clearly, and without any room for doubt. 47 species signed the Compact in its first month. More followed every week after that. Some joined because they believed in the Compact's principles. Some joined because they had seen what happened to the last organization that had crossed humanity, and they were not fools. Both reasons were acceptable. Dohun retired from the Navy on a warm morning in spring. He had spent his career preparing for a war he hoped would never come, and when it came, he had fought it as cleanly and as carefully as anyone could fight a war. But he was tired now, tired in a way that sleep could not fix, and he wanted to do something quieter, with whatever years he had left. He opened a school on the outskirts of a small city on Earth. It was a school for war orphans, children who had lost their parents in the conflict, both human and alien. He taught them history. He was gentle with them in the way that strong men are gentle, carefully and with great attention, as if handling something precious. When alien children first arrived, frightened and unsure, he knelt before them and spoke softly, and waited until they were ready to speak back. He never raised his voice. He had done enough shouting to last a lifetime. Unipark accepted command of the Compact's first joint patrol fleet. It was a peacekeeping force crewed by members of dozens of species, flying ships that carried the flags of worlds that had been strangers to each other a year ago. Una ran a tight operation. She was demanding and fair, and her crew respected her because she treated everyone the same, regardless of species. Her twin daughters visited the bridge on weekends, running through the corridors and asking the alien crew members to teach them words in their languages. The crew loved them. Una watched her daughters laugh and play in the same place where she had once prepared for war, and she thought that maybe this was what victory actually looked like. Director Taewo Shin remained in intelligence. He trusted the Compact because he had helped build it, but he trusted no one else, and he believed that this was what made him useful. He turned his network toward transparency, monitoring not for threats from outside, but for corruption from within. If anyone inside the Compact tried to build the kind of power the Council had held, Taewo would know about it before they finished their first meeting. He was a difficult man to like and an impossible man to deceive, and both of those things made him exactly the right person for the job. Hana Lim became the Compact's first Secretary General. She sat in a chamber that was smaller and plainer than the Council's Grand Hall, and she preferred it that way. She carried Felness's testimony in her bag to every session, a folded document in a clear case. And when discussions became difficult, or when someone suggested that maybe the Compact needed more authority, more enforcement, more control, she placed the document on the table and said nothing. It was always enough. Nari Beck wrote the new Terran military doctrine. She spent 6 months on it, consulting with officers from every branch, reviewing every battle and every decision. The document was thorough and precise, as everything Nari did was thorough and precise. And its first line read, "We do not seek war, but we have learned that peace without the willingness to fight is only captivity with a softer name." It became the most quoted line in Terran military history. Hyuk-no left the service for good and opened a small electronics repair shop on Colony Daehan 2. His son worked beside him after school, handing him tools and learning to solder connections. They did not talk about the station. They did not need to. Some things lived in the space between a father and a son that words could not reach. And the boy knew he had been saved, and the father knew he had done the saving, and that was enough for both of them. On slow afternoons, they sat outside the shop and ate noodles and watched the ships pass overhead. And it was the most ordinary and most beautiful thing in the world. Sun Wukong grew up. He studied hard and graduated early and became a diplomat for the Free Compact, the youngest in its short history. He was calm and articulate and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had looked at the worst the galaxy could do and had decided at 14 that it was not good enough. He never raised his voice in negotiations. He never needed to. There was something in his eyes that told everyone in the room that this man had been tested in ways they could not imagine and had not broken. Ji-Yun-Oh became an engineer. She designed stations and habitats for the Compact, working with alien architects and human builders to create structures that were safe and open and full of light. Every facility she designed had one feature that no one noticed unless they were looking for it. The exits were always placed where a child could reach them. Every door, every hatch, every emergency corridor was low enough and simple enough for small hands to open. She never explained why. She did not have to. Thelmus was pardoned by the Compact in its first session. He returned to diplomatic service as a liaison between his species and the new alliance. He was still nervous. His hands still shook in meetings. But he no longer carried shame. He had done a terrible thing by helping the council. And then he had done a brave thing by telling the truth. And the brave thing had not erased the terrible thing, but it had given him a chance to be something better. He took that chance every single day. Commander Drenok had survived the battle. His escape pod had carried him through the debris field, and he had been picked up by a neutral cargo ship. He lived in quiet exile on a border world, running a small supply post and speaking to no one about the war. When a journalist found him and asked if he regretted following Velthari's orders, he sat in silence for a long time, and then said, "I regret that I did not refuse sooner." A year later, Nari Bek sent him an invitation to serve as a military advisor to the Compact. He accepted. The two of them argued about tactics constantly. They respected each other deeply. Neither one ever said so. Years passed. The Compact grew. The galaxy was not perfect. There were disputes and disagreements and difficult decisions, because freedom was harder than obedience, and always would be. But the species of the galaxy were learning to stand on their own, to speak for themselves, to solve their problems without waiting for permission from a crystal tower. And then one day, a new species made contact. They came in a small, battered ship, their communication signals weak, and their voices full of fear. They were a small species, newly arrived at the stars, and they had heard stories about the great powers of the galaxy. They expected to be dominated. They expected to kneel. A Compact delegation met them at a neutral station. Sun Wukong, now a grown man in a simple gray suit, led the welcome party. The aliens were short beings with wide, dark eyes, and they looked up at the humans and the other Compact species with the kind of fear that comes from knowing you are small in a very large universe. Their leader stepped forward and spoke in a trembling voice that the translators carried clearly through the room. "What do you want from us?" Sun Wu looked at them. He saw their fear, and he understood it, because he had felt it once, in a white room on a cold station, surrounded by beings who saw him as something less than a person. He stepped forward and knelt so that he was at their eye level. He spoke gently, the way Do-Hoon had taught him to speak, the way strong people spoke to those who were afraid. "Nothing," he said. "We are just here to make sure no one ever takes anything from you." The alien leader stared at him. Its wide eyes searched his face for the lie, for the trick, for the hidden cost. It found nothing but a man who meant exactly what he said. Behind Sunwoo, through the station's wide viewport, a Terran warship drifted silently through the stars. It was always there. It was always watching. Not because humanity wanted to fight, but because it had learned that the galaxy only stayed free when someone was willing to stand at the door and make sure it did. The galaxy was no longer at peace. Peace, as the Council had defined it, was gone forever. The galaxy was something better now. Something harder and messier, and worth more than 15,000 years of silence. The galaxy was free.